Shabbat Shalom. I'm Cantor David Proser of Kempsville Conservative Synagogue, Kehillat Bet HaMidrash in Virginia Beach, Virginia. And this is our Torah portion commentary for the Shabbat of Saturday, January 16th, 2021, corresponding to the third day of the Hebrew month of Shvat, 5781. We thank Rabbi Joseph Prauser, Rabbi Joyce Newmark, Rabbi Adam Rosenbaum, and the United Synagogue Torah Spark series for their various teachings and publications on this week's Parsha. This Shabbat, January 16th, we read the Parsha of Vaera in the book of Shemot, the book of Exodus. It begins on page 351 of the Eitz Chaim Chumash and page 232 of the Hertz. We ended last week's Parsha after Moshe and Aharon's first visit to Pharaoh to demand the emancipation of the Israelite slaves ended in Pharaoh's not only refusing, which was expected, but with Pharaoh's increasing the workload required of the Israelites. We begin this week's Parsha with God restating Moshe's mission. He must demand that Pharaoh release his Israelite slaves. God also reassures Moshe that he will fulfill his promise to the patriarchs. Moshe describes his reluctance to approach Pharaoh, fearing that neither Pharaoh nor the Israelites will listen to him. God reiterates assurances that Moshe's mission will be successful and the Israelites will be redeemed. We are also provided with a genealogy of Moshe's family. God assigns 83-year-old Aharon, Aaron, Moshe's brother, to accompany Moshe and instructs the brothers to perform a wonder in front of Pharaoh to bolster their credibility. They are to turn Aharon's staff into a serpent. When Pharaoh's court magicians perform the same trick, Moshe's serpent swallows the serpents produced by the Egyptian magicians. When Pharaoh remains intransigent despite the marvel, Moshe and Aharon initiate a series of plagues. 7 of the 10 plagues are included in this Parsha. As with the rod turned reptile, Pharaoh's magicians are able to replicate the first of the 2 plagues. The first plague had been turning all the water in Egypt, including the river Nile, into blood. Pharaoh's magicians handily, but rather unwisely, turn water into blood, although the Egyptian people were already struggling to find water. Similarly, although the land was inundated with frogs, during the second plague, the magicians compounded the crisis by bringing still more frogs. After the first plague, Pharaoh says that he will let the Israelites leave, and God stops the plague. But then Pharaoh changes his mind. This is the first example of a recurring pattern. God causes a plague. Pharaoh promises to let the Israelites go. The plague stops. Then Pharaoh changes his mind due to a hardened heart. That pattern repeats itself 7 times in this Parsha. It should be noted, perhaps reflecting the extent of the frog infestation, that the longest word in the Torah appears in the description of the second plague. Uvamisharotecha, and your kneading bowls, the only 10-letter word in the Torah. For some reason, reference works commonly fail to record the record length of this scriptural term, listing any number of 9-letter words instead. The third plague, lice, mercifully is beyond the Egyptian wizards' capability, though they do attempt to create more such vermin, the very last thing to be desired during an infestation of lice, notwithstanding Pharaoh's original plan to deal shrewdly with his slaves. In contrast to their ill-advised tactics, the magicians do infer from their magical limitations that a stronger force is indeed at work. This is the finger of God, they concede. Pharaoh, tragically, is far slower to learn this crucial lesson or to conduct himself accordingly. Translators debate the nature of the fourth plague, in Hebrew, arov. Most Jewish translations assert the term refers to packs of wild animals, while many Christian translations indicate swarms of insects. Whatever the nature of the plague, its divine origins are further indicated by the fact that Goshen, the area where the slaves live, is spared entirely from this event. The plague of cattle disease that similarly struck only Egyptian animals is followed by the plague of boils and hail, which also were kept from harming Israelites in body or property. Inexplicably, though the text insists that all Egyptian livestock perished during the cattle disease epidemic, the description of the boils and the fiery hail include afflicted Egyptian animals. After each devastating national blow, Pharaoh persists in defying God by refusing to free the slaves, allowing God's promised punishments to continue in full force. One may be tempted to ask, with all of God's power, why didn't he simply destroy the Egyptians with one plague and free the Israelites? Most commentators agree that God had a dual purpose, to free the Israelites and also to drive home the point to teach Pharaoh and the Egyptians and the rest of the world that there was a true power that was much greater than Pharaoh. The Haftorah for this week is from the book of Ezekiel, verses 28-25 to 29-21, beginning on page 369 of the Eitz Chaim Chumash and page 244 of the Hertz. We thank Rabbi Bex Stern Rosenblatt, a faculty member at the Conservative Yeshiva of the Fuchsburg Jerusalem Center, for her words on this week's Haftorah. This week's Parsha and this week's Haftorah are bookends to the experiment of Israelite self-rule. In the Parsha, Moshe steps up as the leader of the new nation, declaring for the first time its own wants and needs against the ruling Egyptians. That nation will walk out of Egypt and settle in Canaan, land of its birthright, to govern itself according to the Torah it receives from God for many hundreds of years. The Haftorah picks up just as the period of self-rule is ending. Poised at the brink of the destruction of Jerusalem and the temple and the exile to Babylon, the prophet Ezekiel marks the end of Israelite independence. The figure who looms largest at both the beginning and the end of Israelite self-determination is the Egyptian Pharaoh. Hundreds of years after one Pharaoh refused to let the Israelites go, we meet the hubris of another Pharaoh who pledged to help defend Israel against the Babylonians and then reneged. Even as Ezekiel marks the end of Israelite self-rule, the promise in his words is that just as we rose from the exile in Egypt, so too will we rise from the exile in Babylon, and the hubris of the other nations will lead to their destruction. Shabbat Shalom, good Shabbos. Thank you for watching. Please be sure to subscribe, to like, feel free to leave comments below, and hit the notification bell so you know when we always post new content. Shabbat Shalom.